I've been chomping at the bit to get to this model build. Don't go away. Hello everybody and welcome to Fat Guy Productions. I am Paul, coming to you as always from beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. Yeah, I've been really wanting to get to this build for some time, but for one reason or another, I just kept putting it off. Well, no longer. Today, we're going to be tackling the AMT American LaFrance fire engine. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be a very long video, probably at least 2 parts. So, let's quit talking and get to work. Okay, so here it is, the AMT American LaFrance fire engine kit. While I open her up and check the contents, let me just share a few things with you. First of all, this is a rotten kit. Flash, warped parts, odd assemblies, poor fitting parts, questionable instructions. It is indeed a sucky kit. But if you can push through, at the end of the day, you do get a pretty cool fire engine model. This is a kit I've built about 1,000,000 times, but in this build I'm breaking in a ton of new techniques and elements as I'm trying to build a replica of my first assigned unit with the Clark County Fire Department, Engine 14. Here is my old rig. This is an ALF Century Series engine. It's a 1000 model, but the kit is most likely an 800. This means I have a ton of work to do to convert this kit. I'll be using resin parts, photo etch, 3D printed stuff, and scratch building. I'll tell you right now, doing this many extra things to a bad kit like this is, well, kind of stupid. And as such, this build is very nearly going to kill me. Sadly, I vowed to make this the best build I have ever done. Award-winning quality. But I'm not sure I really actually reached that goal. I guess you'll all tell me in the comments. Anyhow, I'm committed, so I need to get building. So, let's bolt out of the starting gate and do something I've never done before. I'm going to cast my own redheads. The kit comes with horrible chrome lights, and even if they didn't suck, they don't match the configuration of Engine 14. I bought some lights from 2 vendors. From a company called 3 Inches Under, I bought some lights along with some other stuff. I wasn't impressed with the quality. I feel odd using the word quality here and skipped using most of their stuff that I ordered. I ordered another set of lights from a British company called KFS, and the lights were nice and even had details cast inside the shells, but they didn't have the style I needed. So I'm going to make my own. I made a short light bar from sheet styrene, and I used the kit lights and the ones I ordered to make my own molds. I used Oomoo by Smooth-On to make my own silicone mold because it's a simple product to use and makes a great clean mold. I created the internals from some sequins and styrene rod, positioned them in the molds, and then cast the lights from a clear resin that I tinted red. It took a few tries to get it the way I wanted, but in the end, the lights are one of my favorite parts of this build. The Oomoo is mixed simply with 1:1 ratio. It's very easy to work with, and you have a decent open time to work with it. Just make sure that you get the measurements right, and you thoroughly mix it. While you do need to get it thoroughly mixed, you also want to try to not introduce a bunch of air bubbles into it. Be sure to scrape the sides, the bottom of the cup, and even your stir stick. I have another video on casting resin parts, and I'll put a link below for you to look at that video, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But I essentially make a mold box, stream the Oomoo in, and then set it aside to dry. After about 6 hours, the Oomoo has cured. I can take apart the mold box and see what I've got. Well, there it is, the mold. And it came out great, I really have to say. I'm super excited about it. As I mentioned earlier, now that I have the mold, I can position the internals and cast the resin. The resin takes 24 hours to dry, so once cast, I just set it aside. And now that everything is cured, I can go ahead and take the parts out of the mold and see if I'm met with success. Well, so far everything is cured, everything looks right, everything is red, everything is transparent, and I'm getting a look at my first light, and man, it looks great. I am so happy about this. I cannot believe I just did this. This is going to be a home run. I'm so excited at this point. And here are all my lights that I made. With the lights cast, I can go ahead and put them aside and start the build. As with all models, even ones you have built a million times, it's important to still practice good habits. I review the instructions, the parts, and I begin to develop a build plan in my mind. This is super important here as I'm replacing 1/3 of the kit with a resin 1000 series cab, and I'm scratch building another 1/3. I like to build then paint, so I take the sub-assemblies as far as possible to be able to paint them as a whole unit. As is the case with most vehicle kits, the build begins with the engine, in this case a V8 turbo Detroit diesel. Parts are cut from the sprues with my beloved Tamiya sprue cutters. I clean off the exceptionally great amount of flash and also residue from the sprues, and I test fit everything before gluing. For most builds, I turn to Tamiya extra thin cement. But on this build, because of the many problems I've had with it in the past, I'll be using the Tamiya fast setting extra thin cement as my primary glue. I take the parts and fit them together. I make sure they are properly aligned, which is super important here as the part fit is often kind of sloppy. And once aligned, I touch the cement to the seam and let capillary action run it around. I like to maintain moderate pressure on the parts so the dissolving plastic of the parts merges and dries as one piece. This also helps the melting plastic fill slight gaps between the parts, minimizing filling and cleanup that you'll have to do afterwards. Even with proper cleanup and gluing techniques, it's important you always pay attention to the seams and make sure that you scrape and sand them away. The diesel from the kit comes with a lot of chromed pieces. I very, very rarely use the chromed pieces in a kit. All the chrome on these pieces is going to be stripped by dropping them into some super clean. I find, except for the most highly polished items, kit chrome looks out of scale to models. That's why I take it off. Super Clean does a fantastic job of this. Just soak them for about an hour and all the chrome will be gone. And just like that, it's that simple. The chrome is off the parts. Super Clean will also take paint off of parts safely, but that's a story for another day. I told you the kit sucks, and right in the very first part, the engine, I'm already having the issues that I knew were coming. The motor has plenty of issues. The alternator has no definitive connection, and the instructions are super vague about its alignment. The air pump is held on with a small pin and no really decent place to attach it. It's more like a dent, really. I knocked this damn thing off the engine at least a dozen times during this build. The belts on the motor are stupidly thick. I'm going to cut them off and replace them with some thin tape, which I'll use to make better looking fan belts. But you could also scrape them down and sand them down to make them look better. With the engine built, I can now go ahead and paint it. I'm just going to use a flat green Tamiya paint here and brush it on. I am not the kind of guy who sweats precise, exact colors. So this is plenty close for me, even though I am aware it's not 100% accurate Detroit diesel color. So, listen, please, don't hate on me for it. Once the motor is done and dry, I'm going to go ahead and give it a coat of clear coat to give it a nice glossy sheen. So before I go too much further, I'm going to have to decide what the final look is going to be. I'm going to go for a super clean, fairly young rig. It'll have some light grime and weathering, but it will clearly look like an in-service fire engine. The one exception will be the body paint, as I want it to be super bright and shiny. Fire vehicles are notoriously well maintained, but they do live a very hard life, and they're going to get beat up and get some rust in spots that the crew can't reach. So, despite the care and love these vehicles get, they are going to show wear and tear, and that's what I'm going to try to represent. I give the motor just a light black wash and the slightest bit of grime. Then I go over it lightly with some rust color using an oil brusher by AK Interactive, and I blend that in. For the exhaust, I cover the entire manifold with the rust color. Then I follow that up with track rust pigment powders. This gives a great, dry, flaky rust look that can't be beat and is super simple to do. I thought building the frame was going to be fairly straightforward, so I didn't hit the record button. And by the time I realized the monumental issues I was going to have, it was too late for me to think about it and go back. But the bottom line is, the frame rails were bent like U's. They were crazy, crazy warped. And I mentioned how bad this kit is, and that's just another example. But with a lot of tape and a lot of glue, I was able to get the frame together and get it looking pretty decent. With the frame, for the most part, together and painted, now I can go ahead and give it a little bit of weathering. I'm just going to hit it up very lightly with the rust-colored oil brusher and blend it in at the rivets and connections. Now I can marry the diesel and the frame. This is another bad area of the kit, as the motor has no real definitive locators, and it sits sloppy on the frame. It's important to make sure the motor is aligned to the frame before gluing it in place. I left the front motor support loose in the frame to help me align the engine before gluing it in place, and that really helped matters here. All in all, I think it's looking amazing, and it's kind of a shame that all of this is never going to be seen again. I still have so many other things to think about, and the frame is getting there, so I'm going to set it aside for now, and I'm going to turn my attention to another major hurdle, the body. The body on the County's engines was substantially different from the kit body. The kit is a great starting point for that, but it's going to need some major modifications. I need to reshape the rear of the engine. I need to create a new upper set of compartments. I need to create a new rear center compartment, raise the hose bed, adjust the bed dividers, and prep the rig to have crosslays. I start by cutting out the center compartment door of the rear panel. Then I'll build the body up according to the kit instructions. I leave off the pump panels and the workings for the booster reels for now. I'm going to go ahead and fabricate the driver's side upper compartments that I need. Now, my past experience with this kit is actually going to be a downfall here. I have built these compartments before, but I have never modified the rear of the truck from the squared end to the slanted one. So, as I build these compartments, I'm actually going to build them wrong for what I'm trying to do here today. I'm going to build them the way I did in the past. Despite the fact that I'm going to do this wrong, we can go ahead and talk about the process of making these cabinets. I'm going to get the measurements, and then I'm going to cut the parts I need out of some thick styrene. For the compartment doors, I'm going to use very, very thin styrene to just intimate a door lip. And here you can get a great idea of how these upper compartments will work out. The diamond plate that would go on the lower compartments will actually fit perfectly on top here. You can also see here how the backs of the compartments are square. They need to be sloped to match the rear of the fire engine, and that's where my downfall is going to be. So I have figured out my mistake, and you see here I am starting the build all over again to include new pieces for the passenger side. So here you see it. I've got everything kind of figured out. Got the new version done, and I'm gluing all the parts together and onto the body. A ton of work? Yes. Worth it? Absolutely. Since I'm already knee-deep in scratch building on the body, I can go ahead and turn my attention to extending the height of the hose bed. Our hose beds were taller than come in this kit. So, I'm just going to cut out 3 styrene panels and put them into the bed to raise the bed. I'll give them a little trim at the top to make it look finished and professional, and boom, I've got a higher bed. Now comes the real hell, the pump. Many of my builds of the past had no engine or pump in them. It just seemed a waste of time for something that no one would ever see, so I just skipped them. But here my goal was perfection, so skipping was not on the table. Building the pump is pretty straightforward. Assemble and paint. The trouble then begins with the transfer case. It sits crooked on the pump, it doesn't have a good attachment, and it's just all around difficult to work with. Things get worse when you go ahead and try to mount the pump to the frame. Again, the instructions suck here, providing no real placement guidance, and it just kind of sits on top of the frame. Getting it in place with the two drive shafts and the flywheel is just a real headache. After the battle to install the pump on the frame here, it really reminded me of why I stopped putting them on in the first place. What a headache. I'm telling you, it's just horrible. I did finally get the pump in place, and then I went ahead and gave it the same touch of weathering as the frame, and I can now very, very happily move on from this. For now, I'm going to redirect my focus to another major upgrade, the cab. Our cabs had a wide body, whereas this kit doesn't come with that. While it is possible to scratch build that, it really isn't practical with all of the changes that would need to be made. So when I heard about these cabs from Models by Dave, I jumped all over it. The cab comes with a new divider, front compartment, bumpers, fenders, trim, glass, and for the most part, it's really well done, which is not to say it's without many, many, many issues. First, the cab has what is probably accurate diamond plate, but it's so accurate it doesn't match the scale of the diamond plate in the kit. Very frustrating. Do I have two different sizes of diamond plate? Do I replace the diamond plate on the cab? Do I replace the diamond plate on the kit? In the end, I decided to go with two different scales, but it was really something that rubbed me the wrong way. There were some pretty substantial fit issues with the cab. The windows were very, very thin and difficult to work with, but in the end, the outside of the cab looked right, and it was really going to help make my vision come to life. Using a bit of CA glue, I'll go ahead and glue the fenders onto the body. With the motor and pump both mounted to the frame and everything dry, I'm going to take a break and turn back to it and just make sure that the weathering is the way I like it. Break out the oil brusher again, do a little bit of chipping, and make sure everything is looking perfect. In the final build, you'll understand more why I don't pay this much attention to the frame and the motor and the pump normally. It's such a shame to put this much work into the parts that you're never ever going to see again. Later in the build, I'm going to sadly and painfully find out that I'm going to need to come back and make some modifications to the frame. I wish I had known that at this point, but hey, it is what it is. You just got to fight through it. This putty by AK is my favorite. I love this stuff. It's my go-to filler, and I'm going to put a link to it down below. I almost forgot something very important on the cab. And so, since I'm back over here while the body dries, I can take care of it right now. The resin cab that I bought does not have a front suction compartment. Ours did. It's a little door in the right lower front corner of the cab, and you open the door and inside is the soft suction. So I'm going to make one myself. I'm using label tape to mark out some guidelines, and then I can take a scoring tool and score the edges of the compartment door. If you're a model builder and you don't have some label tape in your arsenal, you need to get some. I start by making the compartment lines using my x-acto knife. Later I'll switch to a Tamiya scoring knife to make them a little bit wider. All the glue on the body is dry, so now I can go ahead and break out my plastic putty and do some filling. Why do I like this stuff so much? Well, first of all, it goes on very nicely, it dries really hard, and while it's wet, you can smooth it out and work it with a moistened finger or a damp brush. I love this stuff. While things are really moving along, this is kind of like a turning point right here. We are at the point where we start doing a little sanding, a little filling, a little priming, a little sanding, filling, priming, sanding, filling, priming, sanding, filling, priming, and so on and so forth. Everybody's favorite, am I right? Hey, but it does mean we're really moving forward now. So it's kind of an exciting spot to be in, even though it's going to be a hassle and a lot of work. Now it's time for some more casting. The pump panels in the kit are completely wrong for our fire engines. So I'm going to have to make my own. I'm going to start by making molds of the original pump panels. I don't want to just ruin these in case I have an issue. I have something to go back to. So I'm going to make molds of the originals and make some resin casts of the originals to begin with. While the mold cures, I can get back to work sanding. There's a lot of it, and the cab really had its issues and totally needed a lot of sanding, but it's going to pay off in the end because I'm really going to shoot for a super nice, flat, glossy, shiny paint job here. With the primer on the body, you can see how it's all really starting to come together. You'll also notice I'm not having to worry about compartment door handles, as I'm replacing those with photo etched ones. So the existing ones are gone. Okay, so the molds dried, and I took the original parts out and put them away for safekeeping. And now I'm going to just cast some new panels with some resin, and then I can use those as the parts that I'm going to modify and create my own pump panels. I'm using a product called Smoothcast 65D by Smooth-On to cast these pump panels. This is a very quick setting resin. You have to move quickly, but you still have to make sure you mix it thoroughly. You can see it going white in the cup. That means it's already starting to cure. You don't have a lot of time here. After getting it thoroughly mixed, I pour it into my molds, let it flow around, and then let it cure. It literally cures in like 15 minutes. Very, very fast. To glue the bases for the lights on the rear of the cab, I'm going to again turn to some labeling tape. And I'm just going to use it kind of like a straight edge, run it across the cab. That way I make sure I get the lights in the right place. And with that tape in place, I can now go ahead and glue the bases on and make sure that they're going to be in the right place and equal. As long as I'm in the cab mode, I might as well work on the interior. So I'm going to get out all the parts that I need, clean them up, and start getting the cab put together. Again, the resin kit comes with new parts for the interior so that they'll fit and work properly with the new cab, but they're not without their own set of problems. Sometimes the parts don't fit right and they take some modification, and you have to kind of work things out as you go. Alright, for the most part the cab interior is built. I'll set it aside to dry and we can check on our pump panels. So the Smoothcast, as you see, does cure into a nice hard white plastic, and it looks like we're good to go here. To make sure everything's good to go, I'll give it a quick pokey poke, and you can tell that it's hard and solid. So yeah, I can take my pump panels out. Now, these are just replicas of the original pump panel. And you can see there, I actually overfilled the mold a little bit. So I made these a little bit too thick. Something to just think of. It's not a big deal. I can sand these down. And especially it's not a big deal because these are going to be templates for the pump panel I'm really trying to make. But yeah, look at that. A perfect duplicate of the original pump panel, ready for me to modify like a crazy man. So it's time to get back to work on the pump panel. And as you can see here, I've taken the resin ones I made and I've sanded off all the details I wouldn't need anymore. And now I'm going to cast new ones from these pieces with no details on them so that I can use those to make my own pump panels. Again, I'm just going to put them in a mold box and I'm going to use some Oomoo to make the silicone molds, and then I'll use the Smoothcast again to cast new parts with no details except the ones I wanted to keep. With my new featureless pump panels out of the molds, I can now go ahead and start to build them up. I'm going to start by taking a Sharpie and marking out the locations of all the features I'm going to need, such as the gauges, where the charging handles go, where the discharge ports and the like all should be. Now I'm using a variety of circle punches and some very thin sheet styrene, and I'm punching out a ton of different shapes and circles that I can use to build up the pump panel. I now have a big surplus of shapes and different sizes that I can use, and I'm simply super gluing these onto the pump panel that I made earlier. These will be the basis for things like gauges and any other raised detail I'm going to need. When this is all done, I'm going to use it as a master to cast a brand new pump panel. So it's important that I sand everything down and I fill the seams and edges to make sure that the resin doesn't creep underneath the details that I've added. Everything is looking really good here. I've filled gaps, I've thrown some primer on here, I've done some sanding. I'm really beginning to feel the pump panel. So now I'm just adding some tubes to act as discharge ports. For right now, I'm making the tubes extra long. I'll trim them down after everything else is settled, and then I can make sure I'm getting them to the length that I like. I need to remove a section from both pump panels for the crosslays. To do that and make it accurate, I'm first going to remove the excess plastic in the body that will be where the crosslays are going to go. I'll cut those off with a Japanese saw, remove the parts, then I can fit the pump panels into their place and mark out the spots with a Sharpie. As long as I'm working on the hose bed here, I might as well go ahead and put in the divider. I simply cut a piece out of sheet styrene, smooth it off, and glue it in place. In a build like this, you can see how one thing leads to another, and since I'm putting dividers in the crosslay bed, I might as well put dividers in the rear hose bed. The kit comes with a round tank fill, and ours had a square one, and since I'm back here working on the dividers anyhow, I go ahead and form a square tank fill out of some styrene and then glue it in place. With the dividers in and the pump panel looking good for now, I'm going to go ahead and do some measurements on the cab so I can make the decals I'm going to need for this build. I'll just rough out a quick sketch, figure out what decals I need, where they're going to go, then I'll go ahead and take a ruler, get the measurements off the real cab so I can transcribe it and make the decals to the right size. To make my decals, I like to work in Illustrator. I find it the most flexible. I can easily scale things both up and down if I need to. So it's the app for me, and I'm well versed in it. I can always move the file over into Photoshop later if that's where I need to be, but I like to knock things out originally in Illustrator. I found that Adobe's apps can be a little bit spendy, but fortunately for people like me, Adobe has put out a subscription service where I have access to all of their applications for a monthly fee. And because I am a big computer guy, I do a lot of graphics work, and I love Illustrator and Photoshop, this is really, really a bargain for me. And if you are like me, this might be the way to go for you. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do have other videos on making decals, and I'm going to put a link to those below. But I made these decals using my HP laser printer and Ghost White toner. Now it's hard to see, but the Engine 14 logos need a white outline, and this proved to be exceptionally difficult because of the registration issues. I could not get the white border to be equal around the blue number. So I ended up doing a little bit of a workaround in that I printed duplicate decals, sets in just white and sets in just the blue, and I layered the decals on the engine. This was really the only way to get the white border to work out the way I wanted it to. With the decals printed out and ready to go, I can turn my attention elsewhere. And in this instance, I'm going to fill the slots in the fenders in the kit and even in the resin cab kit that I bought. There are grooves in the fenders for these little chrome trim pieces. Well, ours had the whole front half of the fender coated in like a stainless steel sheet, and so these little inserts weren't going to work. I'm using a little epoxy putty, mix it thoroughly, fill the gaps, and then let it dry. Once the epoxy putty is mostly cured, I can take a sharp razor knife and trim away a lot of the excess. This is going to save me a lot of sanding after it's fully cured. So I'm feeling good about the pump panel, I'm feeling good about the decals and the fenders, so I might as well turn my attention to the interior again. I've painted it mostly flat black because that was the color of our interiors, and now I'm just going to do a lot of detailing work. I'm going to paint in all the gauges, and this is one place I am going to use some of the stuff I got from 3 Inches Under. They sent a nice little radio stack that seems to be appropriate for our vehicles. So I'm going to do a lot of cleanup, glue it all together, paint it, and install it. I've got the radio stack, the microphone, and the speaker, and they're all going to add a lot of nice detail to the vehicle. Even though they're not perfect, they're in the cab, they're hard to see, they're going to be perfect. Well, we've been into this for quite a while, so we're going to cut it here, and we're going to come back in 1 week with part 2. Also, the same day, next week Wednesday at 6 a.m., I'm going to release both halves uncut in one long video, so if you prefer to watch the video that way, you'll be able to. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Just remember, patience allows life, time, fall in place. This is Paul from Fat Guy Productions. Until next week, be good.